Hello, and welcome to my presentation, in which the remaining mysteries and confusions surrounding Umineko shall be resolved. This can be seen as a tale of three theories. There is, of course, my Ricatris theory presented in the previous video. There is the official explanation, the Scannentris theory, and there is the Rosatris theory, most extensively elaborated upon in No More's series of videos against the official explanation. I consider No More's refutation of Scannentris to be fairly airtight and will not relitigate the issue here. So this video shall focus mainly on contrasting his alternative theory with my own. Of course, many of No More's solutions to puzzles are identical to mine, such as with the chapel. We both believe that the door of the chapel was never locked, that Rosa was pretending it was locked. Other times, his solution could have been carried out by my culprit, and vice versa. In the linked closed rooms, it is perfectly plausible that Rika could have used Nanjo to plant a key, as No More claims Rosa did. And it is also perfectly plausible that Rosa could have planted a key through a window, as I claim Rika did. So the key difference lies not in the murder mystery, but in the interpretation of other parts of the story. The problem for me is that some red truths, which are used in favor of both the Scannentris and Rosatris theories, seem to contradict my Ricatris theory, specifically regarding the number of people on the island. Earlier, I argued that the limit of 17 humans did not preclude an additional inhabitant because some people counted as furniture rather than humans. This is problematized if the number of people on the island is also limited. The red truth in the previous slide was changed in the Manga Gamer translation I read as compared to the older translation No More read, but there are additional red statements which confirm an equivalence of humans, people, and persons. There are no more than 18 people on this island. Before now, I have proclaimed that no more than 18 humans exist on this island. I will lower that by 1 for Kinzo. No more than 17 humans exist on this island. That excludes any 18th person. In short, this 18th person X does not exist. This applies to all games. This might be a moot point, though, if people and person and human mean the same thing and furniture don't count as any of them. But there's also this problematic statement I highlighted last time. No life forms other than humans have any connection to this game. And No More claims to have a working definition of people in the story, which contradicts mine. Here it is.
What we also need to know is what the definition of the word people is in Umineko. So is the word people actually ever defined? Yes, it is in fact. It gets defined just moments earlier in the same novel, namely the following. Quote, confirming definition. Can I accept 3 people to refer to the numbers of bodies? You're saying that 3 bodies went in and out of the room, right? And then in red. Of course, 3 people, in other words, 3 bodies, went in or out. Only you and Cannon entered and only Battle left. It has already been said in red that all people can only use their own names. Therefore the names Erica, Battler and Cannon can only be used by those people. So here we see that the word people is equivalent to living human bodies.
Let's look at these 2 red truths. 6 people, Kinzo, Genji, Shannon, Cannon, Goda, and Kumasawa are dead. Another. Blah 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 dead. The 15 people mentioned are dead. Rephrased using Known No More's definition, these statements become 6 living human bodies are dead, and the 15 living human bodies mentioned are dead. Obviously, these statements are self-contradictions. It would have been possible to create red truths confirming deaths which respected this definition. See this one. Among the 5 people in Kyrie's group, he, Canon, was the first to die. This can be rephrased using Known No More's definition as, among the 5 living human bodies in Kyrie's group, Canon was the first to die. In other words, someone was living and then they died. But this past tense phrasing is not respected throughout the game. Must people refer to living human bodies rather than human bodies dead or alive? Well, as it was stated before, Kinzo is already dead at the starting time for all games. Before now, I have proclaimed that no more than 18 humans exist on this island. I will lower that by 1 for Kinzo. So, Kinzo is a dead body on the island, but does not count towards the number of persons on the island. Therefore, in these statements, person cannot refer to all human bodies. In other words, the definition of people can change, referring either to living human bodies or human bodies in general, or the definitions of people and person are not the same, such that people refers to human bodies regardless of life or death status, while person refers to something else. Notably, if people always refers to all human bodies, then the statements, in other words, the number of people in this parlor now is equal to the total number of people on this island, and all the remaining people were at the family conference in the dining hall, mean that Kenzo's corpse was in the parlor and the dining hall at those respective times in the 5th game. This seems unlikely. Furthermore, the before now in the statement, before now, I have proclaimed that no more than 18 humans exist on this island, I'll lower that by 1, blah, 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 refers to the statement, there are no more than 18 people on this island. So, all 3 words are interchangeable. This means that they must be able to change meaning to refer either to human bodies or living human bodies specifically. Indeed, Known No More explicitly agrees that these words are interchangeable, entrapping himself. So, is this a contradiction in red, or does any evidence support the possibility of these words having variable meaning? There is at least one word used in supposedly reliable places that changes meaning in Umineko. In episode 5, the tips state that the corpses of several characters were found in the cousin room. In fact, these characters were not dead when found in the cousin's room, and they later left the room and were killed in another location. Renove confirms that the tips are following the rules in using the word corpse this way. No rule named so far has prevented something other than a corpse from being called a corpse. In episode 8, the word corpse is again used in the reliable narration of Bern Costell's game. Relying on the word corpse to hold its traditional meaning is necessary to solving the puzzle. While these sources are meant to be reliable, they aren't pure red truths. But it would actually be better for them to be an airtight example of a word having 2 meanings while also being a red truth. Otherwise, Beatrice's statements create a contradiction in the red, or we must accept that words in red statements can have multiple meanings without any other examples or evidence. Unless there was a statement telling us that words in red truths could mean multiple things. Red truth, I won't give this game a happy ending. How does Lambda Delta respond? The definition of a happy ending is something everyone watching gets to decide for themselves, right? Therefore, I claim that human, person, and people can all refer to either all humans on Rockinjima or only those humans that self-identify as humans. This adds complexity to my theory, and thus makes it less elegant than others on that count. But it does not add a disastrous amount of complexity because other theories must also accept that these words can mean other things. Thus, I am only adding a rule about what these specific words can mean, and am not adding the broader rule that words in red can mean multiple things, which must be accepted under all theories which believe the red to be consistent. Furthermore, there is greater reason to suspect that there would be a double meaning for humans and related words than the double meaning of bodies and living bodies. First, the story contains frequent references to some humans not counting as humans. Second, it is fairly conventional to degrade people as subhuman or lacking personhood for failing to meet some level of status or self-actualization. While the distinction between living human bodies and all human bodies is fairly niche, and the possibilities of corpses sometimes being defined as objects which appear to be dead human bodies veers dangerously close to the story, allowing all words to mean anything and to change this meaning at will. Third, this matches exactly with Lambda Delta's comments about defining a word for oneself. At the starting time of all games, Genji and Cannon define themselves as furniture, while Shannon has decided she is a human. Thus, I claim that there is no problem with humans sometimes meaning Homo sapien organisms, and sometimes meaning Homo sapien organisms that define themselves as humans, which is not analogous to problems encountered by all other possible theories. At best, this work puts the Rickatrus theory and the Rosatrus theory on equal footing, and realistically, Rickatrus is worse, since it requires additional word meanings and postulates more things not directly confirmed in the base game, like the existence of a twin for Erica and the existence of Inhabitant X. Except, of course, for the fact that Rickatrus is still the only theory in which the sixth game does not violate Nox's first. In the rest of this presentation, I will show that Rickatrus has many other advantages alongside this one, including Scannantrus and Rosatrus violate several of Nox and Van Dyne's commandments. It can be shown that Rickatrus does not. Yes, this includes things like Van Dyne's Rule 2, no willful tricks or deceptions may be played on the reader, other than those played legitimately by the criminal on the detective himself. Scannantrus and Rosatrus lack an adequate explanation for the murders continuing after the solving of the epitaph. Rickatrus contains one. Rickatrus is the only theory which can adequately explain the events of the Ange sequences. Rosatrus lacks an adequate account of the nature of the metaworld and the existence of the red truth. Rickatrus can explain the largest number of elements shown throughout Umineko and across its different planes of reality. Rikatress explains the nature of the broader When They Cry narrative in a way that other theories cannot. But first, a detour on Canon's escape. This here is No More's theory for how Canon escaped. This theory technically works, but is disappointing on 3 counts. First, there is no reason to expect that Erica sealed the doors and then the windows. And indeed, it would make more sense for her to seal the windows before gathering people in the rooms, and only then seal the doors. Second, a solution this simple should not have taken so long for Battler to come up with. Third, the motive given for Canon to do this does not make sense. So, what is my solution? Canon broke the window. The seals holding to the edge of the window and the walls remained intact, while a hole in the middle of the window allowed him to pass through. But how is this such a hard conclusion to come to? On its own, it isn't. But figuring out Canon's motivation for smashing the window to save Battler is. Earlier, I said that solutions to logic errors need not necessarily follow standard motivational logic. While I must maintain this position for reasons I'll elaborate on later, I submit that in this case the logic error can and was solved with the motivation for the character. As No More discusses.
Here we saw that Canon said that he was paying back a debt, and that this debt was not to Battler. I explained that I believe that this refers to the fact that it was Rosa who pulled the strings necessary to get Canon employed at the Ushirmiya mansion and therefore be reunited with Shannon, who was very important to her when they both lived in the orphanage. In other words, Canon sacrificed himself for Rosa's sake, meaning that Rosa essentially rescued Battler post-mortem through Canon's sacrifice.
The problem is that Rosa has no way of knowing that Erica is planning on murdering her and trapping Battler. She has no motive to give Canon any task. One could argue that Rosa, out of laziness, delegated her task of placing the letter by the doorway to Canon, and that while doing that, Canon decided to investigate Erica's suspicious behavior. But placing a letter is hardly a commensurate way to pay the debt of someone who you owe your livelihood to, and Canon's saving of Battler would not even be a part of the task Rosa sent him on. Addendum in the edit. I realize now that another interpretation could be that Canon is aware that Rosa is in love with Battler, and so even though she didn't specifically set him on this task as repayment for debt, he realizes that this could be a way to repay his debt because he knows that Rosa cares so much about Battler. The problem with this is that just as Rosa has no idea that Erica is going to kill her and lock up Battler, Canon also has no clue that Rosa has been killed by Erica and that Battler has been locked up by her, so he still has no motive to do this. So, who could Canon owe a debt to? Furudo Erica. In the previous video, I stated that in the 6th game, Erica ran into Rika, and rather than spoiling her plot, decided to collaborate with her. I retract the statement. Furudo Erica is innocent. Of course, she did decide to help her sister, but only because Rika described her plan as a harmless prank to get a little payback for the prank that the Ushiromiyas were committing. Then, Rika locked her sister up along with all of the Ushiromiya's. While in the cousin's room, Erika indebted Kanon to her via the obvious method. Kanon and Jessica mutually love each other, but are both hesitant to express their feelings. Erika, as a master detective, would immediately sense the romantic tension and give a point-by-point breakdown of all the evidence that each person loved the other. With all uncertainties discarded, the two were finally free to be open with each other, and a relationship commenced. Later, Erika became suspicious as she heard Rika leaving her room and the guest house. Examining further, she noticed the seals on the windows and deduced the thumping on the door must have come from Rika applying the same there. Realizing that she had fallen for a trap and that Rika's prank was not what she expected, she quickly devised a counter prank to play. Explaining the situation to the others, she got them to agree to break the window and sent Kanon to monitor Rika and interfere with her plans. Why didn't she go after Rika herself? Well, you see, Erika is a master glass blower. Erika stayed behind to repair the window. It was not a problem that the tools to do so did not exist in the cousin room. As long as they existed somewhere on the island, the hole in the window gave her access to them. This completed Kanon's perfect escape from a closed room, a mystery that Rika could not solve due to her ignorance of this skill among Erika's many virtues. Unfortunately, Erika knew not just how depraved Rika was, and that by sending Kanon out, she'd sentenced him to die at the hands of her own sister. In the face of Rika's path of destruction, the idea that this prank would impress can only be described as a broken window fallacy. Regardless, this theory not only explains how Kanon got out, but also why he did so. Furthermore, the seals being unbroken is used as a way to entrap Battler, but is problematic in the sense that there is no explanation as to why anyone inside the rooms would care about breaking the seals. This theory is the only one to give a motive not only to escape the room, but to do so while maintaining the appearance of a closed room. Finally, it explains the difficulty Battler had in solving the logic error, as the resolution required deducing the existence of twins and crafting a skill set and motivation that would allow the benevolent twin to save him. There is still the issue of the letter Rika finds outside the door of the guest house. This can be explained by any number of delayed, indirect delivery mechanisms. Further discussion on several such techniques can be found in Umineko no Nakukoru ni Chiru, Episode 5. But now, it's time to explore the future. In the previous video, I completely ignored the events taking place after the Rokkenjima massacre, up until 1998, except to provide some evidence on the nature of the message bottles. Largely, this was because I assumed that these sections were fairly irrelevant to solving the mystery of Rokkenjima, and that their overall purpose would not become clear until the end of the story. I am wiser now. From the start, there are major mysteries in the future timeline which can be solved and reflect back onto the past timeline. The first mystery. How did Ange get a hold of Maria's diary? This quote, "It was a shady-looking, stake-shaped weapon with an occult design inscribed upon it. It was one of the 7 stakes of purgatory which the witch used to offer sacrifices. When the police had been searching the family's possessions, they had collected a large amount of junk. After the investigation had finished, these had been politely returned to the Ushiromiya family. Finding something that I'd seen in the pictures of Maria's diaries, I took it home with me. Implies that Ange had the diary before the police gave over the family possessions. It would also be strange for the police to have handed the diary over in the first place, because it is written by the person who is claimed to be the author of the message bottles, and even contains pages in the same handwriting. Not to mention the fact that diaries are not liable to survive explosions. Not only does the diary survive, but no mention of it being damaged is ever made, and this manga panel shows it perfectly unscathed, though it does also seem to claim that it was found among the wreckage. So what? Did Ava save the diary, bring it back home, and give it to Ange? Is there some other way it could have ended up in her hands? The second mystery. Ava refuses to explain what happened on the island, and also refuses to show her diary. Furthermore, she acts in a generally reclusive and erratic way. We can see here that she searched for the founders of strange religious cults. She had her paranoia increased even further. She tells her daughter to become amputee hentai, just wacky stuff. Scanentress claims that she is either gone crazy or that she killed some people on the island without being the true culprit. Rosatrice claims that her behavior is a result of protecting the honor of her son, who was the culprit. This is an elegant solution to Ava's silence, and arguably the strongest part of Rosatrice in comparison to other possible theories. Seemingly, Rikatrice has no explanation other than Ava having gone crazy. Can another be found? The third mystery. When Ange imagines an evil Ava, she does not imagine the adult Ava that she has been raised by, but instead imagines Ava Beatrice, a witch modeled after a teenage Ava. Why would Ange think of this rather than the adult human Ava that she actually knows of and hates? All three problems can be solved with a single postulation. Scanentress and Rosatrice both require that their culprits die by bomb, but Rikatrice does not. Therefore, there is no reason to say that Rika can't influence events after 1986. In the third game, where Ava survives, Ava Beatrice appears, and I claim that this is another disguise of Rika's. If Rika were to interact with Ava after the events of Rokkenjima, of course she would return to this disguise. Since Ava knows much of what happened on Rokkenjima and has a diary detailing the events, Rika has motive to go to her and to try and enforce Ava's silence about the events and get her to reveal the location of the diary so that Rika can destroy it. This way, the remaining evidence that could incriminate Rika will not come to light. This also explains the erratic behavior of Ava more generally, as she is functionally being haunted by a witch version of herself. The other theories can only elegantly explain her silence. Rika also has written in Maria's diary before and must have killed her, so she would have access to it and the ability to take it off the island. Her appearing to Ange in order to give her the diary and interact with her in any other way explains both how Ange has the diary and why she has an awareness of a witch version of her mother. Why Rika would do this will be explained in due time. Consider this statement. Who forgets Ava Beatrice and calls themselves the murderer of Rockenjima. How impertinent! On this island, who lives and who dies is totally up to me. All the wealth and gold is mine. Everything about October 4th and 5th in 1986 is mine to do with as I please. It all belongs to me, Ava Beatrice. Ava Beatrice states, not in red, but over a web of red truth, that she is the murderer of Rockenjima. Significantly, there is another character of 1998 whose mysteries can be solved by postulating that they are one and the same with the culprit of 1986. So, who could this culprit be? Hachicho Ikuko. Our introduction to Ikuko, then calling herself Toya, one of her many pseudonyms, involves her disguising herself. So there is a natural connection to the disguises put on by Rika. The biographical details of Ikuko also would fit with the details of Rika. The Hachijo family owns a large amount of land and is fairly famous. Unlike my accomplished brothers, I'm what you might call a little eccentric. I got into a bit too much mischief, and my parents finally ran out of patience and kicked me out. I'm now confined to this house. As a hobby, I like to read detective novels and also to write them. My age is a single woman's secret. My heart is that of a girl, but I'm approaching the point where calling myself one becomes increasingly absurd. Hachijo Ikuko lived in a small but lovely mansion on the top of a small hill in a village with a view of the sea. She also owned the hill behind her and was more than capable of enjoying the 4 seasons in privacy. Certain details, like the family name and the gender of the siblings, should not necessarily be taken as strong evidence for or against the theory. It's possible that both Hachijo and Furudo are not the true family name of Rika. It is also possible that Erika is a stand-in not for a twin sister, but for a brother, perhaps named Eric. The general point is just that, like Rika, Ikuko comes from a wealthy family and gets into mischief. Furthermore, her house is positioned by the sea, which makes perfect sense for Rika, since Rika is a boat pilot. We also see this. If you don't explain that part about the ocean currents a bit more clearly, it might be a little unfair for a detective novel. She is including details about ocean currents within one of her mysteries. In the previous video, I stated that the reason Rika can use message bottles and ensure that they are found is because she is a boat pilot and therefore has extensive knowledge of the patterns of ocean currents in the area. Well, guess who else that applies to, and in fact uses this knowledge in the context of a detective novel. The evidence couldn't be any more clear. This also fits with Higurashi, in which Ikuko's witch form, Featherine Augustus Aurora, is played by Hanyu. Hanyu is a spirit that clings to Furude Rika. Hanyu is also a Furude, an ancestor of Rika's. If Rika is Bern Castell and Hanyu is Featherina, then they must also be related. And if Bern Castell is Erika and Featherine is Ikuko, then they must be related too. In other words, even without the logic error of the red, one can determine that Furudo Erika has a relative in the form of Hachijo Ikuko. Ikuko claims that the diary was found by Ava's bed on her death. It then reached her hands without anyone else seeing its contents. With the theory that Ikuko is the culprit, less coincidence is required. Ikuko got the diary before anyone else because she has been trying to get it from Ava for all this time and finally succeeded. That Ava's death occurs around the same time is also natural. Now having accessed the diary from Ava, Ava exists only as a liability, and so Ikuko induced an illness in Ava, leaving only herself with the knowledge of the events of Rokkenjima. Finally, after teasing a public revealing of the diary's contents, Ikuko in fact withholds them, thereby forever sealing the cat box. And of course, this explains how Ikuko's forgeries manage to be more accurate to the actual events on Rokkenjima than those of other forgers, and how she is able to use the red truth in writing those stories. Scanentress argues that Toya is Battler, and eventually regained their memories, informing her of what occurred on the island. Ikuko may also have found a message bottle containing our confession. Rosatrice argues that the events of 1998 do not actually take place, though the safety deposit boxes shown in 1998 are evidence of Nandra's being bribed somehow, and that Battler hallucinated the meta world upon death, creating a consistent and lengthy narrative while in coma, which contains red truths which can reliably point towards the events of this narrative, and perhaps also the truth of Rokkenjima Prime. By postulating that Ikuko is the culprit, we avoid interpreting memory loss as death and the nonsense of the Rosatrice theory. After all, there is a certain action permissible only to humans without the detective's authority, and it can become a truth of such overwhelming credibility that witches can easily raise it to the level of red truth. Of course, one needs not postulate that a message bottle forger knows the truth of the murders to write red truths about them. Indeed, this would be incoherent, as different forgeries contain incompatible red truths. The red truth can be seen as the authority of an author to declare something as true within the context of their work. Notably, though, the fourth game contains several red truths about the first and second games. This is only possible if the first and second games were authored by the author of the fourth game. In other words, Ikuko is the author of the original message bottles. These statements from Ange also confirm that she is a piece in the fourth, fifth, and sixth games, and that the scenes featuring her are falsehoods. In other words, she is also a part of Ikuko's forgeries. Yes, I did try to contact Hachijo Toya, but in the end, I never got a chance to meet her. In other words, all of this is a falsehood. Whose piece am I this time? Sorry, but if you think you can tame Ushirumiya Ange so easily, you're making a big mistake. These red truths from Twilight also confirm that Ange, throughout most of the 8th game, is inside of a forgery and not a real-world Ange. When the seal on the book of the single truth is dissolved, you, Ange, will be the first to read it. The truth is written in this diary. This is the truth of the Rokkenjima incident. After all, whether you accept it or not, that doesn't change the truth. After all, this is the single truth proven in red. This is because no human in the real world can use the red, and certainly not to confirm the truth of something they have not read. If, however, Ikuko has read Ava's diary and confirmed its truth by cross-referencing it with her own experience on the island, then she can write a story in which a witch verifies its truth without having read the diary. So, in The Forgery of Twilight, Ange reads Ava's diary and commits suicide. Other scenes in the episode of the visual novel show Ikuko making the diary unavailable to the public, so Ange could never get a chance to read it. One must assume that these events represent the real world, or accept that the real world is never shown in Umineko at all. Of course, no red truth confirms that these scenes take place in the real world, but such red truths could never exist, since red truths can only exist in a fiction, and thus confirm that any world they appear in is in fact not the real world. At the very least, these sequences are not incompatible with reality. In the 6th game, Ange deduced that she was on the game board because in reality, she never met with Hachijo. In the world where Ikuko does not let Ava's diary be read, she has never met with Hachijo, so the same reasoning could not be used to prove that these scenes take place on a game board. If these scenes are real, then it must be explained how Ikuko knows enough about Ange's personal life and the contents of Marie's diary to write about them so extensively in her forgeries. Ikuko being a culprit and showing up as Ava Beatrice to manipulate the lives of Ava and Ange explains both. Theories in which the culprit is dead require another reason for Ikuko to be snooping in Ava and Ange's life. Of course, these requirements can be avoided if, like No More, one claims that the events of 1998 don't actually occur. One could also claim that the final sequence is accurate, but that Ikuko's representation of Ange's life is pure speculation on her part with no necessary level of accuracy. However, the reader must then accept major coincidences as details about Ange in the final sequence, like her attitude to the death of her family and her carrying of the hairpiece battler won her, are accurate to the Ange presented in earlier games. Furthermore, I make a broader claim that the theory which can explain the most events in the story, rather than declaring them to not count in some way, is superior. On a basic level, such a theory necessarily has greater explanatory power. It also necessarily fits the story better and makes the story better by involving as many parts of the story as possible and making them as consequential as possible. Of course, the real reason that I think these scenes take place in the real world, and are essentially the only ones to do so, is essentially intuitive. It just feels wrong to me to never have any scenes that take place in the real world, and to end on a scene which does not take place and doesn't even impact much other forgery scenes due to its taking place many years after them. There is, however, an additional reason. I believe that I can show this scene to be the culmination of Ikuko's plot, and that this culminatory act must take place in the real world to work. That this act, being the finale of Ikuko's schemes, explains some of her other actions, and that it resolves the true conflict of Umineko, both narratively and thematically. All this to be explained in due time. For now, though, we have learned that our culprit, Rika, is in fact Hachijo Ikuko, to be referred to from now on as Furudo Rikuko. We now know that the culprit is Hachijo Ikuko, who is Furudo Rikuko. However, there is another identity that I must clear up. Previously, I solved Beatrice's final mystery in the fourth game like this. Beatrice, when not a role played by Erica, can be seen as a manifestation of the rules of the game. The game rules state that many die if the epitaph is not solved. Furthermore, if Battler does not solve the mysteries of these murders, he must die as well. No one solved the epitaph, and Battler did not solve any of the mysteries, so he must die. However, a red truth in the 8th game makes this interpretation unworkable. Beatrice died in October of 1986. Therefore, the golden land she created was completely destroyed. Your family that was kept alive in the golden land was destroyed along with it. Your father, mother, and of course Battler will never return to you again and will never speak your name again. Therefore, Beatrice must be a person. Have an imagination in which she included Battler's family members. Have died in October 1986. Be the owner of the Ushiromiya gold. Have nothing to gain from anyone solving the epitaph. Have created the games to fight Battler. Have never committed murder for the sake of pleasure. Follow her promises. Not have the goal of making someone experience fear or getting revenge on someone. Have made the riddles solvable because she wanted Battler to solve them. All of this, and I have to make the character fit into my overall narrative about Furuta Rikuko. So, who could Beatrice be? Inhabitant X, also known as the man from 19 years ago, also known as Claire, also known as Leon, also known as Yasuda. In the official explanation, Claire's story details how Yasuda garnered the additional personalities of Shannon, Cannon, and eventually Beatrice. Simultaneously, Yasuda is the grandchild of the real Beatrice and incestual child of the second Beatrice. Yasuda coming to identify as Beatrice is coincidental though, as they are unaware of this lineage. Yasuda then solves the golden epitaph and is recognized as Beatrice by the servants. The Rosatrice explanation states that this narrative is in fact one crafted in Rosa's head. She saw herself as a lowly servant due to her manslaughter of the second Beatrice and decided to take up the Beatrice identity to revive her and thereby atone for this sin. By postulating that Yasuda is an additional servant rather than an additional personality of two servants who are one, or of a master, the coincidence of Scannantress and the bizarre psychologies of both theories can be avoided. A major element of Claire's story concerns Yasuda losing items. Refusing to believe that she is that absent-minded and lacking any other explanation, she blames the disappearances on the witch Gap. In other words, a gap of the gaps. But what if these disappearances really weren't her fault? What if there really did exist a figure who appeared to Yasuda as Gap? In other words, a gap of the gap. Furuta Rikuko first started enacting her plot in the guise that would come to be known as Gap. The Beatrice portrait had not yet been put in place, so she would not know what Beatrice was meant to look like. In her investigations to the Ushiromiya family, Rikuko had discovered Kenzo's scandalous grandchild and that Yasuda was this child. Deciding to make this part of her plot, she focused on pranking Yasuda and eventually convinced Yasuda to see herself as a witch too, specifically the incomplete reincarnation of Beatrice. Rikuko could of course directly reveal to Yasuda that they are the child of Kenzo and the second Beatrice, and she could also use other elements of Yasuda's life as evidence. For instance, if Yasuda was born with male genitalia that were damaged in their fall from the cliff, This could be portrayed as evidence of the witch Beatrice seeking to escape from an incorrect male body. When the portrait and the epitaph appeared, Rikuko convinced Yasuda that it was her duty to her father to complete this ceremony and fully revive Beatrice. Yasuda has an interest in mystery novels and a crush on Battler, either because the relationship presented in Claire's story was between her and Battler, or because she witnessed it between Battler and Shannon and, being jealous, developed an imitative interest in mystery novels. Therefore, she agreed to devise a series of murder mysteries which would follow the epitaph plot. Rikuko wrote these out into bottle messages and would carry out the murders herself. Rikugap also lets us explain why the murders continue after the solving of the epitaph. In Scanantris and Rosatris, the culprits solve the epitaph themselves, but go ahead with the murders afterwards, for some reason not accepting that their solving of the epitaph counted, and that their being presented with the Beatrice outfit and then taken to see Kinzo in it was the resurrection of Beatrice. The murders then continue even after the other inhabitants of the island solved the epitaph, either because Shannon was not aware of these events, because Kyrie and Rudolph started murdering, or because George continued murdering after Rosa stopped. With Rikugap, there's a simple reason that Beatrice's game went ahead after she solved the epitaph. She never solved the epitaph. Rather, Furudo Rikuko solved the epitaph and left the door to the Golden Land open. She then created a trail, say of gold bars, which Yasuda would find, and thereby come to have ownership of the gold without having to solve the epitaph herself. The door to the Golden Land magically opening on its own and leading her to itself would only further confirm in the mind of Yasuda that she really was Beatrice and needed to carry out the epitaph murders. If she did not come to this conclusion immediately, Rikuko would be there to guide her to it. The murders continue after others on the island solved the epitaph because Yasuda, or Beatrice, has only devised the murder plots. Furudo Rikuko is the one carrying them out, and she does not actually believe in the epitaph or intend to follow its rules as Beatrice does. So we see that Beatrice is the game master and Rikuko her piece. But if you flip the game board around, then the piece was in control the whole time. Now that the exact nature of the game board has been laid out, it is pertinent that we re-examine the individual mysteries themselves and elucidate how they fit into this overall structure. Furthermore, I shall show that my theory is consistent with the solutions that Willard H. Wright gives in the 7th game. While these solutions are never confirmed in Red to be accurate, the other theories claim to be in accord with them, and thus my theory would be weaker in comparison if it did not, for the same reason that those theories are weaker for being unable to account for the details of the final scene. The Scanantris and Rosatris solutions to the first game's first Twilight are as follow. Will's solution. Allusions to illusions. The corpse that cannot return to Earth returns to illusions. Official explanation. There are only 5 corpses in the garden shed. Shannon is actually standing there in her canon disguise. Hideyoshi and Nanjo are Shannon's accomplices. In other words, Hideyoshi simply lied to George about Shannon being there. So the corpse that cannot return to Earth returns to illusions refers to Shannon's corpse being the illusion. Shannon wasn't dead to begin with. And No More's explanation, George and Rosa, and probably Nanjo, took everyone to the shed. Rosa and George killed Goda, Kyrie, Rudolph, and Kraus. They used garden tools to rip their faces apart. Rosa and Shannon's deaths were faked, using the fake death drug. Their wounds were faked. Nanjo lied in the morning about Rosa being dead. My initial theory accepted that all 6 corpses were in the shed, so it must be adjusted. Summary. George asks if there are only 5 bodies, but Hideyoshi tells him that Shannon's body is also there in a corner. He tells George that it might be better for him to not see her face, which was half destroyed. George asks if Shannon has a ring on her finger, and Cannon points out to Hideyoshi that it is on her left ring finger. Tears fall from George's face. Ava tries to express shocked disapproval at the implication, but Hideyoshi stops her. Solution. The 6th corpse in the garden shed is Yasuda playing dead. Hideyoshi is already an accomplice according to my theory of the second Twilight, so he could lie about this. Alternatively, since Hideyoshi has to be told by Cannon that Shannon is wearing a ring on her finger, the claim that Shannon is dead and has a half-destroyed face could also have been fed to Hideyoshi by Cannon without his checking. There are many reasons that Cannon might lie about this, but I propose this explanation. Shannon was kidnapped around the same time as those in the garden shed were killed. A letter with a Polaroid photo of Shannon was sent to Cannon, along with instructions that, should he want Shannon to live, he should lie about Shannon being dead in the garden shed and come to the boiler room at a later time. Since Shannon is like a sister to Cannon, he would follow these requests. Second Twilight, the guest room. Illusions to illusions. A chain of illusions can only hold back illusions. Official explanation. Cannon, Genji, and Kumasawa simply lied about the chain being set, meaning that it was never set in the first place. Or, Cannon killed Ava and Hideyoshi after he cut through the chain, so he didn't discover the course. He produced them after the closed room was destroyed. No more solution. George went to his parents' room and asked them to let him in. Given that it was their son whom they trusted, Ava had no problems letting him in while Hideyoshi was taking a bath. Then George quickly killed them both. Rosa was hiding somewhere in the mansion and met up with George at a prearranged location. After George killed his parents, he left the room and joined up with the others in the parlor. Then Rosa entered the room and planted the stakes in the corpses. She then set the chain and placed the letter under the door. Then she hid herself underneath the bed. After Genji and Cannon discovered the room chained shut and left again, Rosa went, unset the chain, painted the magic circle on the door, set the chain again, and hid under the bed again. My original solution still works and fits with the idea of a chain of illusions only holding back illusions, since Ava and Hideyoshi's corpses are faked in my solution. Alternatively, if you wanted the chain itself to be an illusion, Rikuko could have indeed created a chain which appeared to hold the door shut, but could actually be undone from the outside. She even does this in the 6th game when she cuts open the chain of a door and then fixes it by wrapping it with duct tape. Since no one carefully inspects the chain before or after cutting it, such tampering would go unnoticed by the Ushiromiyas. No more solution is also usable in this case. Just replace George with Rikuko and Rosa with Yasuda. Will solution. Illusions to illusions. The witch and stake of illusions can pierce naught but illusions. Official explanation. Cannon faked his death in the boiler room. He is one of Shannon's personas and therefore the culprit. Nanjo is an accomplice and pretended that Cannon had died. No more solution. Cannon faked his death in the boiler room to be the 0 on Beatrice's roulette, sacrificing himself rather than being killed by Rosa. Afterwards, he was sedated by Dr. Nanjo. Cannon probably died in the explosion at midnight.
I originally interpreted the Red Truth. All of the survivors have alibis. Let us include the dead as well. In short, no kind of human or dead person on the island could have killed Cannon. To mean that, as far as Battler knew, there was no one who could have killed Cannon. But if there was another person on the island, not a survivor, but a culprit, then they could have done the deed, and did. This interpretation must still be true, but Will's wording also strongly suggests that Cannon is not dead. Rikuko's ransom letter to Cannon could have asked him to fake his death in the boiler room, with a stake provided for him to do it with. Afterwards, the accomplice Nanjo confirms his death. Alternatively, Rikuko met Cannon in the boiler room and attempted to kill him, but Kumasawa entered before she could finish the job, and she had to flee the room while Cannon lay on the verge of life and death. No More's solution could also be used, though it is weaker due to the odd motivation and, as No More admits, unexplained stake. The Red Truth states that no one could have killed Cannon, not that no one did. This is problematic since, in my solution, Rikuko most definitely had the chance to kill Cannon, even if she did not. So I must interpret the red in a somewhat strained way. Fortunately for me, so must everyone else. No More's solution has a free-to-roam Rosa, just as mine has a free-to-roam Rikuko, so the theories are completely analogous on this front. As for the Scannintress theory, Cannon can be killed at any time by one of his other personalities. In the linked closed room murders, it is stated that none of the 6 committed suicide. Shannon, therefore, was killed by one of her other personalities. Then, Cannon was killed by Yasuda or Beatrice, or perhaps even a resurrected Shannon. Nothing stops this from happening in the boiler room scenario. In no theory is it straightforwardly the case that no kind of human or dead person on the island could have killed Cannon. We see a similar issue in another red highlighted by No More, the red stating, "There are no unidentified corpses, and all of the survivors have alibis." 6th to 8th Twilights, The Parlor. Will's solution, illusions to illusions. Illusions are the blind girl's song, illusions of a closed room. No More's solution. Rosa stepped into the parlor carrying a gun. She told her daughter to face the wall and sing a song. She then shot Genji, Kumasawa, and Nanjo. Afterwards, she dialed the number of Kenzo's study, left the phone off the hook, left the parlor, and locked it with Shannon's or Goda's master key. This theory is compatible with the Rikuko theory, as my theory is compatible with the Rosatress theory. First Twilight, The Chapel. Will's solution, illusions to illusions. The gold truth locks the lock of illusions. No More's solution. The door of the chapel was never locked to begin with. When Rosa tried to open the door, she pretended that it was locked, and when she retrieved the key, she pretended to unlock it. This is the same as my solution. Second Twilight, Jessica's room. Will's solution, illusions to illusions. Illusions who have fulfilled their role don't leave a corpse. Official explanation. Shannon killed Jessica as Cannon and then erased her Cannon personality. She used her own key to lock the door as she was holding 2 master keys to begin with. No More's solution. When Rosa joined up with the others, she secretly gave Nanjo Cannon's master key. Then, when searching Jessica's corpse, Nanjo pretended to find the key in her pocket. No More's solution for the locked room is compatible with my theory, as mine is with his. I will let him explain Will's statement, because again, the interpretation works equally for both theories once you simply change the culprit.
Since Cannon in a sense appears in the next scenario, I believe that it was part of Rosa's plan to make Cannon disappear in order to set up the murdering demon version of Cannon's scenario. After all, she's trying to make things seem magical. So basically she's trying to make it seem like Cannon killed Jessica and later appeared as a demon who can move in and out of locked rooms without using a key. So the illusion here is that it seems like Cannon killed Jessica and then disappeared while leaving his key inside the room.
7th and 8th Twilights, The Servant's Room. Will's solution, none given. The reason is simple. The correct solution which I laid out is far too convoluted to be explained in a single pithily poetic line. Therefore, it was skipped to allow for a consistent style to Will's answers. 4th to 6th Twilights, Nazi's Room. Earth to Earth. No one would dispute that a coffin is a closed room. Official explanation. Shannon killed George and Goda, and then she committed suicide. This is the reason why she's the only person in the room without a stake in her body. No More's solution. George came clean as Shannon. Shannon did not accept this, which resulted in a struggle. George was forced to kill Shannon using the stake itself. George chose to still fake his death. George put something under his clothes to stab the stake into, meaning that his wound was fake. Then, when he took the fake death drug, he really died because Rosa had poisoned his fake death drugs. Nothing about Will's statement contradicts my interpretation, so I will hold to it. However, the knowledge of Yasuda being Inhabitant X does allow me to update it slightly. One of the magical events that occurs in this section is that, while Beatrice chases Shannon, George, and Goda, she changes from her suit and skirt outfit in the chapel to her dress in the mansion. Obviously, it is impossible to make such a wardrobe change while giving chase. Having no explanation for this event, I shamefully ignored it in my original video. Now, however, there is a simple solution. In the second game, Yasuda dresses as the suit Beatrice, and Rikuko dresses as the dress Beatrice. When Beatrice interacts with the servants, she is in her suit outfit. This must be Yasuda, as the servants have acknowledged Yasuda as Beatrice ever since she solved the epitaph, and would not mistake Rikuko for Yasuda. When Beatrice is shown killing people, she is wearing the dress. This must be Rikuko, as Yasuda only devises the murder scenarios. She does not carry them out. Thus, the group ran into Yasutrice when in the chapel and fled back to the mansion, where Rikutrice was in waiting. 7th and 8th Twilight, The Garden. Will's solution. Earth to earth, illusions to illusions. No illusion can create a corpse. No Nomura's solution. Kumasawa and Nanjo were probably killed after George killed Goda and Shannon. Then he returned to Natsuhi's room to fake his death. George used something like a large kitchen blade to slice Nanjo and Kumasawa's neck opens. George simply betrayed Nanjo and killed him. My solution is similar to No Nomura's, in that it is just a blunt murder. No illusions can create a corpse. I simply have switched the culprit. First Twilight, The 6 Closed Rooms. Illusions to illusions. In a closed room ring, the beginning and end overlap. No Nomura states, instead of it supporting the Shannon theory, Will's solution refers to the fact that the illusion in this scenario is that we are dealing with a ring. But that is the illusion. In actuality, this scenario is not a ring or circle, but a line in which the beginning and end don't overlap. Dr. Nanjo planted Shannon's master key on her body after they broke into the parlor. As No Nomura acknowledges, Battler actually uses the Blue Truth to pose a similar theory, which Beatrice does not deny in the red. No Nomura's solution could, of course, easily be accomplished by Rikuko, but is not necessarily satisfying, since it involves interpreting Will's solution to essentially mean the opposite of what it says. My solution, though, fits perfectly. To recap, Rikuko fills the 5 living victims and burns Kenzo, and then locks them one by one into various rooms, locking them as she goes. With her final key, Rikuko scales a wall, goes into a window, leaves the key inside, and then climbs back down. She seals the window without locking it, hoping that no one tests to see if it is locked. The room is the end of the closed room ring. If the body inside it was the first of the bodies to be placed in a room, then it is also the beginning of the closed room ring. Thus, the beginning and end overlap. Second Twilight, The Rose Garden. Will's solution, earth to earth, no falsehoods in their final moments as told. Or as No Nomura would say, George killed Rosa and Maria because Rosa wanted to put a stop to the murder scheme because the epitaph was solved by Ava. Will's solution simply refers to the fact that there is no closed room, no illusions, and nothing suggesting magic in general. Just 2 corpses, and that's it. 4th through 6th Twilights. Earth to earth, no falsehoods in their final moments as told. Official explanation. Ava is the killer, but Hideyoshi was probably killed by Kyrie and Rudolph. Or, Shannon is still alive, despite the red, and killed the 3 of them. His explanation. George snuck out of the guest house and killed Kyrie, Rudolph, and Hideyoshi in the entrance hall. The obvious interpretation of no falsehoods in their final moment as told is that Ava Beatrice, also known as Furuta Rikuko, who was presented as the murderer of these crimes, was in fact the murderer. It also can refer to As Known No More argues, the fact that there are no kind of murder mystery locked room shenanigans occurring in these crimes. They are blunt murders for which no how done it is required. 7th and 8th Twilight, The Arbor. Earth to Earth, the obvious culprit wields a mutable blade. Natsuhi and Kraus were poisoned by Ava, No More claims. The obvious culprit is the culprit of all the other murders. It is not clear what Will means by the culprit wielding a mutable blade. In the fantasy presentation of the scene, the Chester sisters fire bullets which can shift direction mid-air and squeeze through door keyholes, but presumably such mutable blades cannot exist in reality. No More proposes that a liquid poisoned it. I counter-propose a switchblade. Why not? Another interpretation could be that this refers to Kraus and Natsuhi being killed by one means, and then having their corpses mutilated in another fashion later on. In essence, no one weapon is a mutable blade, but the victims' bodies were mutilated twice over, and the instrument with which this was done shifted between the first and second mutilations. Both Scannantris and Rosatris require this to have taken place, and it makes the most sense for it to be the case in Rikugap as well, or else there would be blood in the guest house. Ultimately, Will's statement here doesn't refer clearly to anything that can be gleaned from the text, and doesn't distinguish well between the theories at all. 9th Twilight, The Parlor. Will's solution, not given. In fact, it is suspiciously absent. As No More claims, Nancho saw no choice but to shoot George in the parlor. He then quickly ran out and locked the door behind him. Because this happened very sudden and wasn't planned, Nanjo never checked to see if George truly was dead. Since Will gives no solution, there's nothing to match mine against. Of course, No More implies that this is a suspicious absence, essentially because it allows for the possibility of George being alive to kill Nanjo later. None of the later Twilights are given an explanation either, though, so this absence is not singularly suspicious. It is still evidence that No More's theory is correct, in the sense that if Will had given a solution stating, Earth to Earth, yo, George was dead, y'all, then No More's theory would be less likely than it is with no solution. However, it is weaker evidence than an existing solution stating, allusion to illusion, Romeo did not join Juliet. Furthermore, all of Will's solutions which point towards Scannantris being true are indeed evidence of Scannantris being true. No More claims that these are rather there to mislead readers into believing a false theory, and indeed, their existence is evidence of this being the case in that were there no solutions phrased in a way that imply Scannantris, then no one could be fooled into believing it. But, by the same token, a suspiciously absent solution which provides evidence that George is alive at a later point than the reader would naively expect also provides evidence that Rikishi is trying to trick the reader into thinking that George is alive at a later point than the reader would naively expect. In other words, Rikishi is misleading the reader into believing a false Rosatris theory, so that only the 1 in 1,000 true rational thinker can realize that Rikugap is correct instead. First Twilight, The Dining Hall, Illusions to Illusions, Tales woven by the gold truth return to illusions. Or as No More would put it, Kinzo here is used as a title rather than a name. That way there is no conflict with any red statement. What happened in the dining hall was that Rosa revealed the truth about her being the new family head, and everyone acknowledged this. There are no contradictions with my theory. Rikuko forced everyone to agree to a story about Kinzo killing people. For unclear reasons, No More wants to explain that Kinzo refers to Rosa rather than to a fictional Kinzo devised for the game board. The only reason I can think of is that this way the meaning of the gold truth can be maintained as what people believe rather than what people say they believe. But this is contradicted by the very next Twilight. Second Twilight, Will's solution, Illusions to Illusions, Tales woven by the gold truth, return to illusions. As No More says, George killed Jessica after forcing her to lie on the phone to Battler. So, that is a gold truth that she does not truly believe in. This is also consistent with my explanation. Know No More's explanation is problematic because George makes Jessica tell a lie about his death. Then, not only does George die, but he dies in the exact way he made Jessica say he would die. Unless George is suicidal, it makes much more sense for someone who is not George to make Jessica tell this lie. 4th to 8th Twilights, Earth to Earth, Illusions to Illusions, Silent Corpses Adorned by Fiction. As Know No More puts it, after Rosa went on a killing spree, she forced Kyrie into making a phone call to Battler in which she had to tell him not to doubt the existence of witches and demons. Again, there are no contradictions with my theory, and in this case, no issues with Know No More's interpretation to highlight. 9th Twilight, The Garden Shed, Illusions to Illusions, Earth to Earth. When fiction is shut up inside a cat box, it becomes truth. Know No More's explanation, George didn't throw the actual garden shed key through the window, instead he threw in another random key with the label switch. He later returned with the real key to kill Goda and Kumasawa. Will's solution seems to suggest that the key that Battler found was the fiction that became truth. In other words, the fake key that became the real key. George returned the real key via the window, which he had to leave closed but unlocked. If he himself couldn't fit through, he could have used a wire. My theory fits perfectly. Goda and Kumasawa's hanging is a fiction that they created to deter suspicion from themselves. Then they were shut into a cat box, the garden shed, and the fiction became truth as Rikuko shot them through the window. This concludes Will's solutions. But I must run through these games one more time and explain how the shifting nature of the Beatrice character throughout the games fits within a Yasutris Rikugap theory. Rikuko and Yasuda are collaborators, but the partnership is not steady. In the third game, Beatrice decides to be nicer to Battler, but another witch, Ava Beatrice, shows up and starts murdering in her place. At the end, Beatrice reveals the truth, dispelling Ava Beatrice's witch powers. This fits within my theory perfectly. Yasuda believes that she is Beatrice, and must either slay the Ushiromiyas or have them solve Kenzo's epitaph. When they solve it, Beatrice must therefore become nicer and no longer kill anyone. Since this narrative was a ruse crafted by Rikuko, she continues the murders as Ava Beatrice. Yasuda realizes that she has been tricked by Rikuko and can thus explain that neither of them is a witch. The murders that occur after the solving of the epitaph are also different than the ones before in that they don't have any locked room mystery elements. This makes sense if Rikuko is now operating off of Yasuda's initial script and just winging the murders. The murders becoming increasingly improvised also makes sense in light of the fact that the third game is generally considered to be the one which most closely resembles the events of the real world. It's impossible to predict how people would react to one's initial closed-room mysteries, and thus you cannot reliably set up pre-planned follow-up closed-room mysteries, such as those presented in the first two games, which were narratives written before the Rokujima murders, which necessarily involve predicting the actions of all the Ushiromiyas. We can look at the actions of the meta-world Beatrice throughout the other games to determine her and Rikuko's relations in all but the first game, which does not contain meta-world scenes. Indeed, the second game presents a deliberate contrast to the third game. Summary. Maria points out that the letter never suggested that Beatrice wanted the gold, and only asked if they could solve the epitaph. Rosa finds an envelope on the table. It contains a letter from Beatrice reminding the survivors to focus on solving the epitaph instead of trying to resist her. Maria confirms that Beatrice's ceremony will end if they solve the epitaph. Battler notices an envelope on the table and opens it to find another letter along with the magic circle that meant discord. The letter warns that they are running out of time to solve the epitaph, as the 9th Twilight would be starting soon. Solution. The second game presents a Beatrice that is fully on board with the murders throughout. It also noticeably focuses more on the promise of the murders ending if the epitaph is solved than any other game, with the culprit dropping letters to remind people to solve the epitaph right up to the end of the game. This is a natural representation of the ideal collaboration between Rikuko and Yasuda. No one ever solves the epitaph, so Rikuko can kill everyone without Yasuda turning on her. To further ensure Yasuda's cooperation, Rikuko gives the survivors regular reminders that they should solve the epitaph. Note that Yasuda and Rikuko would have written this story before the murders actually occur. It is not an actual portrayal of their collaboration going perfectly, it is their presentation of what this might look like. If murders were to actually start occurring, it is possible that Yasuda would immediately turn foul to the idea. Indeed, the fourth game seems to present just this possibility. In it, Beatrice states, "I'm the Golden Witch Beatrice, and I opened this game in order to fight Ushiromiya Kinzo's grandchild, Ushiromiya Battler." And yet, throughout the entire game, she seems to be apathetic, eventually letting Battler kill her with false solutions. In all of the magical sequences, Beatrice is not to be found. Instead, Kinzo, and, in her first appearance, Gop, take on the duty of slaughtering the Ushiromiyas. This can be explained thusly. Yasuda indeed opened the game in order to fight Battler, but she did not in fact participate in the game or fight Battler. She decided that she didn't have the heart to go ahead with the murders, but Rikuko ignored her calls to stop the plan. Rikuko appears as Gop instead of Beatrice to indicate that Yasuda/Beatrice is no longer taking part in the game. Previously, I noted that in the fifth game, it was stated that in other words, the number of people in this parlor now is equal to the total number of people on this island, which meant that Rika was hiding in the parlor alongside Inhabitant X. This is a bit of a random idea in my theory. Why is Inhabitant X here? But now it makes perfect sense. Inhabitant X is Yasuda, who is collaborating with Rika, so of course they are both hiding together, spying on their eventual victims. As I noted then, Rikuko notices her twin sister and realizes that she cannot enact the plan originally made by her and Yasuda. Now, Erika's interruption explains why Lambda Delta is the game master instead of Beatrice. In the original presentation of my theory, Rika was not only the culprit, but also the mastermind of all games. In this theory, the duties are split between Rikuko and Yasuda. When Rikuko is forced to improvise before the game has even begun, Yasuda ceases to be the game master, and thus Beatrice is also not the game master in the meta world. In the sixth game, Beatrice is again not the game master. This time, Battler is presented as the game master. Indeed, Beatrice in this game is said to be dead, and Battler's game is notably different from those that Beatrice created. He presents no magical circles or other references to the supernatural, and no one dies by his hand. Indeed, people are only ever killed by Rikuko, who again does so in a straightforward manner, with no closed room trickery of her own. We come again to these truths. I am the visitor, the 18th human on Rokkenjima. Even if you do join us, that makes 17 humans. In my original video, I stated that this could be resolved by postulating an Inhabitant X who existed in the first 5 games and not the 6th. We now know that Inhabitant X is Yasuda, who is Beatrice. Beatrice is dead in the meta world, just as Yasuda is dead on the game board. The 6th game is a timeline in which Kinzo's child died falling off the cliff. We know from the scenes presenting the backstory of Ikuko and Toya that Ikuko is not talented at coming up with plots for her mystery stories and relies on Toya to come up with the mysteries. Thus, it is only natural that within a world with no Yasuda to devise mysteries for her, Rikuko would resort to just bluntly murdering people when they were alone. Indeed, the whole relationship between Ikuko and Toya is a metaphor for the relationship between Rikuko and Yasuda. Toya is supposedly Battler, who is found disabled and without his memories. Yasuda is of course disabled from the cliff fall, and Rikuko's plot involves getting them to believe that they are a reincarnated Beatrice, a witch who would regain her powers if only she could just truly remember who she was. Even Toya's regret at regaining the memories of Battler has analog. Yasuda regrets trying to become Beatrice when the epitaph murders begin occurring for real. The first 6 games can thus be seen as a taxonomy of the potential relationships between Yasuda and Rikuko. The first game is a cat box in which we are given no indication of the feelings of Beatrice. The second game represents the perfect collaboration of Yasuda and Rikuko. The third game represents Rikuko revoking her cooperation by continuing the murders after the epitaph is solved. The fourth game represents Yasuda revoking her cooperation by refusing to go along with the murders from the start. The fifth game represents Yasuda and Rikuko's cooperation being broken up by an outside force. And the sixth game represents a world in which no cooperation can exist in the first place. We now also see why Battler was able to come to love Beatrice despite her repeatedly murdering his family. He comes to realize that she never wanted to murder his family, that she had been manipulated by Rikuko, and that all of the artistry of the games he has been playing comes from her, while Rikuko supplies nothing but violence and cruelty. Another interesting aspect of this theory is that it is fully compatible with Scanintrus. To make an alteration whereby Scannon have been manipulated by Rikuko rather than Yasuda having been manipulated by Rikuko, all one must do is change the solutions to the Twilight which involve Shannon and Canon to the solutions which utilize Scanintrus, and it changed the explanation of Erica being both the 18th and 17th human on the island to her having washed up dead on the island in earlier games. Ultimately, I choose not to believe this explanation, not because I think there is strong evidence for a Yasuda character separate from Shannon and Canon, but because I find biting bullets which state that humans can alternately be defined as living Homo sapiens and living Homo sapiens who define themselves as human, and that an introduction X for Rikuko exists, to be more palatable than biting bullets which state that the contradictory reds surrounding Scanintrus are not an issue, and that the Ushiromias are stupid enough to not notice that Shannon and Canon are the same person over a time span of years. Of course, there is another reason to reject Scanintrus and Rosatris. They violate both Nox's commandments and Van Dyne's rules. Let's go through them, one by one. Nox's Decalogue. The criminal must be someone mentioned in the early part of the story, but must not be anyone whose thoughts the readers has been allowed to follow. The mysterious stranger who turns up from nowhere, in particular, from a ship as often as not, whose existence the reader had no means of suspecting from the outset, spoils the play altogether. The second half of the rule is more difficult to state precisely, especially in view of some remarkable performances by Mrs. Christie. It would be more exact to say that the author must not imply an attitude of mystification in the character who turns out to be the criminal. I have already explained extensively on why Scanintrus and Rosatris violate this commandment, and I think it needs no further elaboration, so I won't dwell on it here. On to the second. All supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. To solve a detective problem by such means would be like winning a race on the river by the use of a concealed motor engine. And here I venture to think that there is a limitation about Mr. Chesterton's Father Brown stories. He nearly always tries to put us off the scent by suggesting that the crime must have been done by magic, and we know that he is too good a sportsman to fall back upon such a solution. Consequently, although we seldom guess the answer to his riddles, we usually miss the thrill of having suspected the wrong person. Fortunately, Knox's comments on Father Brown are just a venture, and not a commandment, as all possible theories would clearly violate it were it one. Unfortunately, it also appears that the detective problem has been solved by supernatural means. The Red Truth is a supernatural aid given to Battler, and other features of the story, like the fragments which reveal Kinzo's backstory, are also blatantly supernatural in nature. Scanintrus is in clear violation of this rule. Rosatris gets around it by saying that Battler has simply hallucinated the meta-world, and while the red truths are consistent with his internal narrative, they bear no necessary relation to the real world. It's not quite clear that this solves the issue though, as one could argue this means that Badler has simply hallucinated a mystery novel, which violates Knox's second. Rikugap appears to violate this rule as well, and I shall offer no assuagement here, as I must make other points first in order to show why it does not. No more than one secret room or passage is allowable. I would add that a secret passage should not be brought in at all unless the action takes place in the kind of house where such devices might be expected. When I introduced one into a book myself, I was careful to point out beforehand that the house had belonged to Catholics in penal times. Mr. Milne's secret passage in the Red House Mystery is hardly fair. If a modern house were so equipped, and it would be villainously expensive, all the countryside would be quite certain to know about it. Arguably, certain features of Kinzo's mansion, like the entrance to the Golden Land and the passage to Kuadorian, count as secret rooms and passages. Indeed, Kuadorian is an entire secret house, necessarily composed of a multitude of transitively secret rooms and passages. We must assume that, because none of these rooms and passages are needed to explain the closed room mysteries, that the rule is thereby not taken to be violated. No hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used, nor any appliance which will need a long scientific explanation at the end. There may be undiscovered poisons with quite unexpected reactions to the human system, but they have not been discovered yet, and until they are, they must not be utilized in fiction. It is not cricket. Nearly all the cases of Dr. Thorndyke, as recorded by Mr. Austin Freeman, have the minor medical blemish. You have to go through a long science lecture at the end of the story in order to understand how clever the mystery was. No theory violates this rule, though Rosa is dangerously close given its reliance on a fake death drug. One could fairly easily postulate a specific discovered drug for this purpose though, as I used a specific drug when explaining how the adults were captured in the fourth game. No Chinaman must figure in the story. Why this should be so, I do not know, unless we can find a reason for it in our Western habit of assuming that the Celestial is over-equipped in the matter of brains and under-equipped in the matter of morals. I only offer it as a fact of observation that if you are turning over the pages of a book and come across some mention of the slit-like eyes of Chin Lu, you had best put it down at once. It is bad. The only exception which occurs to my mind, there are probably others, is Lord Ernest Hamilton's 4 Tragedies of Memoir. Umineko seems to escape this commandment on a technicality of using one Asian race over another. However, it is not so. Kinzo used to live in Taiwan, and Genji is originally from a rich Taiwanese family. In other words, Genji is Han Chinese. Given that Knox admits there are exceptions in his rule, and that Umineko is necessarily not written via Western habit, though, we can assume that this commandment is more flexible than others, and Umineko's breaking of it is not a genuine violation of the Knox. No accident must ever help the detective, nor must he ever have an unaccountable intuition which proves to be right. That is perhaps too strongly stated. It is legitimate for the detective to have inspirations which he afterwards verifies before he acts on them by genuine investigation. And again, he will naturally have moments of clear vision in which the bearings of the observations hitherto made will become suddenly evident. But he must not be allowed, for example, to look for the lost will in the works of the grandfather clock because an unaccountable instinct tells him that this is the right place to search. He must look there because he realizes that is where he would have hidden it if he himself had been in the criminal's place. And in general, it should be observed that every detail of his thought process, not merely the main outline of it, should be conscientiously audited when the explanation comes along at the end. This rule is not violated by any theory. Of course, in no theory is it the case that every detail of the detective's thought is conscientiously audited when the explanation comes along at the end, as no explanation but Willard's exists, and his barely constitutes a main outline, and is certainly not audited. Unfortunately, this is only a rule in general, not an absolute part of the commandment. The detective must not himself commit the crime. This applies only where the author personally vouches for the statement that the detective is a detective. A criminal may legitimately dress up as a detective, as in The Secret of Chimneys, and elude the other actors in the story with forged references. Not violated. The detective must not light on any clues that are not instantly produced for the inspection of the reader. Any writer can make a mystery by telling us that at this point, the great Picklock Hole suddenly bent down and picked up from the ground an object which he refused to let his friend see. He whispers, "Ha!" and his face grows grave. All that is legitimate mystery-making. The skill of the detective author consists in being able to produce his clues and flourish them defiantly in our faces. "There," he says, "what do you make of that?" And we make nothing. Not violated. The stupid friend of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal any thoughts which pass through his mind. His intelligence must be slightly, but very slightly, below that of the average reader. This is a rule of perfection. It is not of the essay of the detective story to have a Watson at all, but if he does exist, he exists for the purpose of letting the reader have a sparring partner, as it were, against whom he can pit his brains. "I may have been a fool," he says to himself as he puts the book down, "but at least I wasn't such a doddering fool as poor old Watson." Watson does not exist. Twin brothers, and doubles generally, must not appear unless we have been duly prepared for them. The dodge is too easy, and the supposition too improbable. I would add as a writer that no criminal should be credited with exceptional powers of disguise unless we have had fair warning that he or she was accustomed to making up for the stage. How admirably is this indicated, for example, in Trent's last case. In my previous video, I explained how the audience had been prepared for the existence of a twin, and also explained in each case of Rikuko's disguises that they did not require an exceptional disguising ability. Scanatress is in clear violation, as there is no indication of Shannon or Cannon being good with disguises, and they have pulled off the most remarkable stunt of disguising ever recorded, to appear as two people to a multitude of others over the course of years. Rosatress has Rosa appear as Beatrice to her daughter, who accepts any story of witchcraft, to his servants, who accept her as Beatrice after she solved the epitaph, and to Badler at the end of the fourth game. In this case, it is at night, and she is in a window a couple stories above him, so her disguise could work reasonably without need of perfection, not in violation. Van Dyne's commandments. The reader must have equal opportunity with the detective for solving the mystery. All clues must be plainly stated and described, not violated. No willful tricks or deceptions may be placed on the reader other than those played legitimately by the criminal on the detective himself. Seemingly, all theories must violate this rule. I will explain soon enough why Rukukap does not, but not yet. There must be no love interest. The business in hand is to bring a criminal to the bar of justice, not to bring a lovelorn couple to the hymnal altar. Again, it seems inconceivable that any theory could not be in violation. In due time. The detective himself, or one of the official investigators, should never turn out to be the culprit. This is bald trickery, on a par with offering someone a bright penny for a $5 gold piece. It's false pretenses. Not violated. The culprit must be determined by logical deductions, not by accident or coincidence or unmotivated confession. To solve a criminal problem in this latter fashion is like sending the reader on a deliberate wild goose chase and then telling him, after he's failed, that you had the object of his search up your sleeve all the time. Such an author is no better than a practical joker. Not violated. The detective novel must have a detective in it, and a detective is not a detective unless he detects. His function is to gather clues that will eventually lead to the person who did the dirty work in the first chapter. And if the detective does not reach his conclusions through an analysis of those clues, he has no more solved his problem than the schoolboy who gets his answer out of the back of the arithmetic. Not violated. There simply must be a corpse in a detective novel, and the deader the corpse the better. No lesser crime than murder will suffice. 300 pages is far too much pother for a crime other than a murder. After all, the reader's trouble and expenditure of energy must be rewarded, not violated. The problem of the crime must be solved by strictly naturalistic means. Such methods for learning the truth as slate writing, Ouija boards, mind reading, spiritualistic seances, crystal gazing, and the like are taboo. A reader has a chance when matching his wits with a rationalistic detective, but if he must compete with the worlds of spirits and go chasing about the fourth dimension of metaphysics, he is defeated ab initio. The same is Knox's second, and Scannantris and Rosatris violated for the same reasons. Again, I will show that Rikugap does not shortly. There must be but one detective, that is, but one protagonist of deduction, one deus ex machina, to bring the minds of 3 or 4, or sometimes a gang of detectives to bear on a problem, is not only to disperse the interest and break the direct thread of logic, but to take an unfair advantage of the reader. If there is more than one detective, the reader doesn't know who his co-deductor is. It's like making the reader run a race with a relay team. Not violated. The culprit must turn out to be a person who has played a more or less prominent part in the story. That is, a person with whom the reader is familiar and in whom he takes an interest. Not violated. Scannon, Rosa, and Ikuko are all major figures that the reader is interested in. A servant must not be chosen by the author as the culprit. This is begging a noble question. It is a too easy solution. The culprit must be a decidedly worthwhile person, one that wouldn't ordinarily come under suspicion. Not violated, assuming that Scannon ceases to be a servant upon solving the epitaph. There must be but one culprit, no matter how many murders are committed. The culprit may, of course, have a minor helper or co-plotter, but the entire onus must rest on one pair of shoulders. The entire indignation of the reader must be permitted to concentrate on a single black nature. Violated by Scannantris as the obvious culprit in the 7th and 8th Twilights of the third game is Ava, making 2 culprits. Rosatris is even worse, as it includes George as a culprit on top of Rosa and Ava. Also, while Ava was acting in misguided self-defense, George has his own motivations for being the culprit, meaning that he can't be seen as a minor helper or co-plotter to Rosa. Indeed, it is a vital part of No No More's theory that Rosa and George can betray each other and kill people that the other does not want to kill. They have double black natures. Secret societies, Camoras, mafia, et al. Have no place in a detective story. A fascinating and truly beautiful murder is irremediably spoiled by any such wholesale culpability. To be sure, the murderer in a detective novel should be given a sporting chance, but it is going too far to grant him a secret society to fall back on. No high-class, self-respecting murderer would want such odds. Not violated. The method of murder and the means of detecting it must be rational and scientific. That is to say, pseudoscience and purely imaginative and speculative devices are not to be tolerated in the Roman policière. Once an author soars into the realm of fantasy in the Jules Verne manner, he is outside the bounds of detective fiction, cavorting in the uncharted reaches of adventure. Not violated in the method of murder, but the redundant mention of the means of detecting the murder are again violated by Scannantris and Rosatris. The truth of the problem must at all times be apparent, provided the reader is shrewd enough to see it. By this I mean that if the reader, after learning the explanation for the crime, should reread the book, he would see that the solution had, in a sense, been staring him in the face, that all the clues really pointed to the culprit, and that, if he had been as clever as the detective, he could have solved the mystery himself without going on to the final chapter. That the clever reader does often thus solve the problem goes without saying. Not violated. A detective novel should contain no long descriptive passages, no literary dallying with side issues, no subtly worked out character analyses, no atmospheric preoccupations. Such matters have no vital place in a record of crime and deduction. They hold up the action and introduce issues irrelevant to the main purpose, which is to state a problem, analyze it, and bring it to a successful conclusion. To be sure, there must be a sufficient descriptiveness and character delineation to give the novel verisimilitude. Not violated. Umineko's bloat exists in dialogue, not narration. A professional criminal must never be shouldered with the guilt of a crime in a detective story. Crimes by housebreakers and bandits are the province of the police department, not of authors and brilliant amateur detectives. A really fascinating crime is one committed by a pillar of a church or a spinster noted for her charities. Not violated. A crime in a detective story must never turn out to be an accident or a suicide. To end an odyssey of sleuthing with such an anticlimax is to hoodwink the trusting and kind-hearted reader. Violated by Rosatrice, as the corpses of Rosa and George are regularly, necessarily caused by the culprit intentionally or accidentally dying in the bomb blast. Most versions of Scannintress violate the rule for the same reason, but some variations, like Scannintress, avoid this issue. However, Battler's death is still a violation in those cases, as he dies of an accident while boating away from the island and losing his memories. No criminal forces his memory loss. The motives for all crimes in detective stories should be personal. International plottings and war politics belong in a different category of fiction, in Secret Service tales, for instance. But a murder story must be kept whatever, so to speak. It must reflect the reader's everyday experiences and give him a certain outlet for his own repressed desires and emotions. Not violated. And, to give my credo an even score of items, I herewith list a few of the devices which no self-respecting detective story writer will now avail himself of. They have been employed too often and are familiar to all true lovers of literary crime. To use them is a confession of the author's ineptitude and lack of originality. Determining the identity of the culprit by comparing the butt of a cigarette left at the scene of the crime with the brand smoked by a suspect. Not violated. This technique is used, but it doesn't determine the identity of the culprit. The bogus spiritualistic seance to frighten the culprit into giving himself away. Not violated. Forged fingerprints. Not violated. The dummy figure alibi. Not violated. The dog that does not bark and thereby reveals the fact that the intruder is familiar. Not violated. The final pinning of the crime on a twin or a relative who looks exactly like the suspected but innocent person. Not violated. Erica was never suspected as the culprit. The hypodermic syringe and the knockout drops. Not violated. The commission of the murder in a locked room after the police have actually broken in. Not violated. The word association test for guilt. Not violated. The cipher or code letter which is eventually unraveled by the sleuth. Seemingly violated in all theories. The epitaph is such a cipher and is solved by Erica, the sleuth, in the 5th game. So, now we are left with these rules seemingly violated. All supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. To solve a detective problem by such means would be like winning a race in the river by the use of a concealed motor engine. No willful tricks or deceptions may be placed on the reader other than those played legitimately by the criminal on the detective himself. There must be no love interest. The business in hand is to bring a criminal to the bar of justice, not to bring a lovelorn couple to the hymnal altar. The problem of the crime must be solved by strictly naturalistic means. The cipher or code letter, which is eventually unraveled by the sleuth, must not appear. I propose that all of these can be resolved via the same change in perspective. We just need to ask one question. Who is the sleuth? Frudo Erica. Hi, pleased to meet you. I'm Frudo Erica, the detective. I may be an uninvited guest, but please welcome me. Of course, Battler was also the detective in earlier games, as shown in several Red Truths. Natsuhi's room was locked. The lock on Natsuhi's room was declared active by Battler, the detective at that time. Natsu's seventh commandment: the detective must not be the culprit. Battler cannot be an accomplice. He cannot repeat someone else's lies. Miss Beatrice's locked rooms cannot all be explained away as matching stories. Throughout the fourth game, you were the detective. Until then, Battler had been the detective and could not be culprit or accomplice. And both of them used similar supernatural techniques to arrive at the truth. So what difference does it make? Well, consider the wording of the commandments carefully. All supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. To solve a detective problem by such means would be like winning a race on the river by the use of a concealed motor engine. The problem of the crime must be solved by strictly naturalistic means. The objection only applies in the case of a mystery being solved. Let it be known, Battler does not solve the mysteries when he is the detective in the first 4 arcs. Erica does not solve the mysteries when she is the detective in the 5th arc. When he solves the nature of Beatrice and her games in the 5th arc, Battler is no longer the detective, and so he is under no obligation to only use clues that are fair to the reader. One might object that non-detective characters should also adhere to this rule, but it is an absurd proposition. Consider the rule: the culprit must be determined by logical deductions, not by accident or coincidence or unmotivated confession. This rule cannot apply to all characters. In a serial murder mystery like Umineko, there are non-detectives who also wonder who the murderer is, and learn the answer with no logical deduction, when the murderer shows their face to them and kills them. If all characters must follow the same restrictions as the detective, then any serial murderer would be obliged to kill only indirectly, in disguise, or by some other means in which the culprit could not tell who they were. This is an absurd limitation on the genre that is obviously not the intent of the rule. Similarly, the detective being barred from the supernatural cannot thus prevent non-detectives from utilizing the supernatural. Delanor also objects by noting that Battler could still be the detective in the 5th game, which would bar him from such supernatural techniques. Ever the Noxian dogmatist, if she had read up on her dying, she would know that there must be but one detective. Still, Battler obliges by proving that he cannot be one. In this game, when I figured out the device of the epitaph's riddle, I witnessed Grandfather. As has already been shown and read, Grandfather doesn't exist. It was impossible for me to witness him. Therefore, it has already been shown that my viewpoint wasn't objective. Battler also states in this read that he was the one to figure out the device of the epitaph's riddle. In other words, while Erica helped Battler solve Kinzo's cipher, she did not solve it herself, and thus there existed no cipher or code letter, which is eventually unraveled by the sleuth. This solves the issue of supernatural means being used to solve the mystery and of the existence of a cipher. But we are still left with the numerous willful tricks and deceptions played on the reader, and the 3 major love interests presented throughout the story. I ask again, who is the detective? Inside Umineko, there exists 2 battlers.
There is a battler on the game board of Rokkenjima, and there exists a meta-world battler who comments on the events of the game board. One assumes that the meta-world battler is the detective. After all, he's the one making all the arguments, but this is not necessarily so. It is possible that the battler of the game board, who is never presented with the witch illusions that the meta-world battler is presented with, is the only true detective. This doesn't solve the issue, as the matter is about willful deceptions perpetrated toward the reader, and those most certainly do still exist, even if the detective is unaware of them. Still though, it is an example of the ambiguity of the nature of the detective. We don't even quite know what it means for there to be but one detective, given that there is a second detective introduced for the 5th game. Clearly, there can be multiple detectives so long as they are separated by time. What about detectives separated by metaphysical reality? Can 2 battlers simultaneously be the detective because one exists on the game board and the other exists in the meta world? This brings us to another point. There
is a third unseen battler, one who exists not on the Rokkenjima presented in Rikuko's forgeries, but on the real-world Rokkenjima these forgeries were based upon. While we know that Battler is the detective in Rikuko's first 4 forgeries, who was the detective when Battler is dead? Outside of Ikuko's narrative, there's a real world. So I rephrase my question. In the real world, who is the detective? Furuto Erika. Rikuko is a message bottle forger, also known as a witch. On the other hand, there are the witch hunters. These roles are, of course, perfect analogs for culprit and detective. Who better to be the hunter/detective for the witch/culprit, Furuto Rikuko, than her twin, Furuto Erika? But how can I suggest this when we know basically nothing about the events of the real world? We must ask the question of why Rikuko would include a representation of her sibling in her works and give her the role of detective in the first place. Furuto Erika is an unnatural inclusion in the story that must be justified in some way. Consider the fact that, in essence, Rikuko's forgeries are fan fiction, category, celebrities, and real people. And what does such literature want to do but to become self-referential fan fiction, category, celebrities, and real people? Imagine a certain forum crawler posting under the internet handle Burn Castell, accusing a certain author called Ito Ikukuro of not being a mere forger of possible deaths for the Ushiromiya family, but of being the actual murderer in the real world. How else is an author to respond but to put the accuser in the next installment of their serialized tale to brutally mock them? So, you want to play detective, huh? Let's see how this little intellectual rapist fares when dropped into my board game. The readers applaud, eager to see the schizo reply guy taken down a peg, delighted to see their favorite author indulge in internet drama, completely unaware that Burn Castell's suspicion of Ito Ikukuro ultimately derives from a familiarity. This makes the narrative of the 5th game much clearer. In it, an uninvited guest arrives, declares themselves detective, and starts trying to solve various mysteries and flaunt her intellect. A perfect metaphor for an internet poster who constantly butts into other conversations to explain their grand theories and show off. This grandstanding is ultimately shown to be folly, as the detective ends up falsely accusing Natsuhi, an innocent woman, and failing to solve the true crime. Ito Ikukuro is presenting herself as Natsuhi, a pure maiden, being scandalously attacked by an intellectual rapist. This also explains why Erika was defeated with the golden truth. In other words, mere consensus. It is a metaphor for the defeat of Burn Castell in the real world. Of course, the readers of Ito Ikukuro's works would side with her over an obnoxious contrarian poster. Thus, the golden truth of the internet forums becomes Ito Ikukuro is innocent, Burn Castell is crazy. This is also consistent with the use of the gold truth elsewhere. While its introduction makes it seem inspirational, Willard's solutions repeatedly refer to lies which protect the culprit as being gold truth. Thus, in the 5th game, Battler's gold truth exonerating the innocent Natsuhi is in fact a metaphor for a gold truth protecting the culprit in the real world. This also lets us explain the nature of Lambda Delta. Lambda Delta is a witch. In the real world, witches are forgers or authors. Lambda Delta is exactly the kind of user handle an internet author would have. The introduction of a new character to the island necessitates writing a new mystery, and with the skills of Yasuda no longer available, Rikuko sought the help of another forger, making the 6th game part of an even more rarefied era of literature. Author collab self-referential fan fiction, category, celebrities, and real people. In the 6th game, Battler becomes the game master. Of course, Battler died on Rokkenjima in 1986, and the 6th game is blatantly one written entirely by Rikuko. Hence there is no mystery in the 6th game, only Battler's false crimes and Rikuko's blunt murders. This is the result of Rikuko writing on her own. While Rikuko may not be able to write a proper mystery on her own, she is a master ironist. After the 5th game, a story all about the evils of Erika's false accusations, she creates a story in which Erika appears to be the murderer. That the Nox makes this impossible is of no matter. Her goats will eat it up, and the Erika of the real world will be unable to escape the gaslighting. Indeed, us readers cannot know just how far the character assassination goes. Is Erika's belligerent, smarter than thou, child dream crushing personality a reflection of the real Erika, a parody of an edgy Bernkastel internet persona, or an entirely fictionalized personality, simply what the goats want to dismiss the dreaded accuser of being? I reckon that the true personality of Furudo Erika is much more like that of one Furude Rika. Not an overeager detective, but a normal person forced to take on the role by circumstance, constantly on the verge of giving up. The 7th game is another collaborative work, now between Bernkastel and Ito Ikukuro. Consider it an apology after the mockery of the last 2 games, letting Bernkastel explain her theories in a text canonized by the author. This explains the double meaning behind the truth that Furudo Erika is the detective, and shows why no willful tricks or deceptions may be played on the reader other than those played legitimately by the criminal on the detective himself. The criminal is the author of the message bottles, and the detective is a reader of them. Thus, any and all deceptions within the text are deceptions that are being legitimately played by the criminal on the detective. The 7th arc presents the detective, Furudo Erika, explaining her solution. Willard's solutions exist in obscure, poetic form because Rikuko has edited Erika's plain English before publishing the story. On top of obscuring the fact that Bernkastel still believes Ito Ikukuro to be the culprit, and muddying her reasons for why, it also allows Rikuko to further mislead her readers by rewriting Erika's solutions in a form which technically maintains her meaning, but which strongly suggests another meaning, Shkanatrus, which she would prefer her readers to believe. Known No More has arguments on a meta level for why Ryukishi would create misleading solutions to his mystery. However, he has no in-universe explanation for why Battler's hallucinations would create a set of misleading answers for himself. The Rikugap theory explains this. Now that the nature and purpose of Rikuko's deceit has been established, we must wonder what other features of her stories are misleading. In doing so, we must consider a very important quote and Furudo Erika's rebuttal. Without love, the truth cannot be seen. If there is love, you start imagining things.
The essential meaning of without love, it cannot be seen is that love explains the motive of Shkanatrus. As Rikishi states, I have this feeling that most of the people who arrived at the truth were women, because the key is being able to imagine Yasu's feelings. Umineko is something that cannot be read by people who never fell in love with somebody. It is something that people who have no experience in love and relationships have trouble understanding. Love can become a motive that has more power over you than life or death. That is something which is pretty hard to explain to people without this experience. Most of them will think that it's just an overdone motive. But for people who have known love and experienced how much it can make you suffer, they understand that love can turn your world upside down. If you are told, I will come for you again, and for 6 years there is nothing, it can make you go crazy. But people who have even slightly suffered due to love will say, those 6 years must have been hell. But people who know nothing of that pain will probably wait for nothing less than a dramatic gadget to appear, like the heroic story of, at age X,
her mother and father were brutally murdered. Why ain't that spelled correctly? I just copy-pasted that. Whatever. It's their mistake. I'm leaving it in. Rikishi also directly states, because the heart lies at the center of this work, even Van Dyne's 20 rules cannot destroy love. Well, I must object to that, because the Van Dynes are the red truth, and without love it cannot be seen is not. Let's read this. I'll make you my favorite furniture. I'll love you so much and make you my toy until you turn to ashes. The above line comprises the only reference to love in the red, and it certainly does not portray any kind of positive love that Battler would come to appreciate. Remember that Rikuko's motivation spawns from the myth of the spirit mirror and the inability of it to grant her love. In major part, her crime can be seen as a discrediting of love. What better way to throw off the scent than to make her story about a culprit with the opposite motive? And, while on the surface the story would seem to endorse love, a careful reader would see that love is defined in red as making someone your furniture and toying with them until they turn to ashes. Battler's acceptance of this fate is a dark twist ending, made darker by the fact that much of the audience will have been gaslit into accepting it alongside him. In other words, Van Dyne is not violated because no romances actually occurred on Rokkenjima. These were all distractions on the order of the magical battle between Beatrice and Virgilia, pitfalls written for Erica and the other readers. Admittedly, this aspect of the theory supports Rikugap Scannintress somewhat more strongly than Rikugap Yasutris, because Scannon could not only write false loves between Shannon and George and Cannon and Jessica, but actually act out those false loves in the real world. And thus we see the overall structure of Umineko. There are 4 witches and a man caught between them. Beatrice has taken control of his family's island and is tormenting him. Berncastel, while not necessarily an ally to Battler, wishes to stop Beatrice's game. Lambda Delta, an enjoyer of the game, wishes to keep it running as long as possible. And, in the background, Featherine has set up all of these people against each other. Of course, this only describes the meta world. In the real world, we see that Featherine is in fact Rikuko, and she has collaborated with Yasu to create a mystery on Rokkenjima and kill the Ushiromiyas. Rikuko's sister, Erica, seeks to solve this mystery. Meanwhile, Lambda Delta is a major fan of Rikuko's fan fiction works on the Rokkenjima murders, and wishes that her serialized story would go on forever. But if there is no battler motivating all this, then what is keeping these witches tied together? Ange. The end of the 7th game sees Berncastel presenting Ange with a vision of Rokkenjima, in which the adults solve the epitaph, but then proceed to squabble over the money until Rudolph and Kyrie begin murdering everyone. Ange desperately wants for her hated adoptive mother, Ava, to be the culprit, and having her birth parents be the killers is emotionally destructive to her. In the 8th episode, a version of Ange is seen reading Ava's diary, falling into despair, and murdering herself, implying that these events, or something like them, is the truth of what occurred on Rokkenjima. At the end of this show, Berncastel appears to give a red truth, which confirms that Rudolph and Kyrie are the culprits. But in the final game, Berncastel claimed that she anticipated Ange cutting off her red truth, and that the full statement would have been that this is all truth isn't necessarily so. The 7th game is edited by Rikuko, and this moment functions just the same as Will's misleading truths. Rikuko has cut out the rest of Berncastel's red, making it appear as though she now believes in a Rudolph-Kyrie theory over an Ito Ikukura theory, and wishes to torture Ange over it. Neither, of course, is true. There is no contradiction with Berncastel saying she intentionally had her red cut off in the next game. The 8th game is another collaborative effort written by both Bernkastel and Battler. Obviously, Bernkastel is the pseudonym of the real-world Furuto Erika, while Battler, like in the 6th game, is just a stand-in for Furuto Rikuko, who is actually seen writing portions of the 8th game herself when she tears apart Lambda Delta as Featherine Augustus Aurora. That statement of Bernkastel's is just another of Rikuko's edits. Consider Bernkastel's game in the 8th game. Here, she also makes Rudolph and Kyrie the culprits, throwing in Battler for good measure. To a certain extent, this game constitutes a mockery of Rikuko's stories. Where those are full of ambiguities and lies, Bernkastel's game is straightforward and can be solved with a simple process of elimination. In essence, she is calling out Rikuko for not really playing fair, no matter how much she may point to the following of arbitrary rules such as Knox's and Van Dyne's. Willard even calls Bernkastel out for breaking Van Dyne's 12th, that there must be only one culprit, even though the trio of culprits involved in Bernkastel's game in no way invalidates its fairness. But there is a more important reason than petty one-upsmanship of Rikuko for Bernkastel to have created this game. As Erika states, it's possible to form a logical explanation other than the Rudolph's family culprit theory. For example, a theory with George's family as the culprits is possible. No, it is possible. A culprit is defined as one who murders. No one ever said that they have to murder a character who appears in the story. In other words, if George committed murder outside the island sometime before this crime, he could be a culprit without killing anyone on the island, and it would be possible for him to lie. After all this talk of fairness, Furuto Erika swoops in and deconstructs the logic of the puzzle, showing that Kyrie, Rudolph, and Battler are not necessarily the culprits, and indeed, there is no single solution to the problem. Why would Bernkastel's own piece ruin the perfection of her master's game? Because the game was never meant to be perfect, and Bernkastel intended for Erika to point this out. Bernkastel is providing a lesson about games and stories, even a tale that appears to be vastly more airtight than the wide-open narratives of Rikuko can be blown apart and turned on its head. She needed to make this point because of Ava's diary. The 7th game contains many details which cannot be gleaned from the earlier games, such as the fragments detailing Kenzo's backstory. I claim that these exist because of Rikuko telling Erika additional details about her narrative, while Erika wrote the 7th game. Rikuko would claim that these details were made up for her story, or revealed by Ava's diary. Erika, of course, would believe that Rikuko had learned these details while on Rokkenjima. The story in the 7th game with Rudolph and Kyrie is what Rikuko claims Ava's diary details. Rikuko might even share excerpts from the diary with Erika to try and prove her statement. It is a red truth that Ushiromiya Ava's diary, the book of the single truth, has the truth of Rokkenjima during October 4th and 5th, 1986, recorded within it. Of course, this only applies to the diary within Rikuko's forgeries. The diary of the real world has no necessary relation to the truth. But it is a safe assumption that Ava did not make a bunch of shit up, and that the diary explains what happened on the island to the best of her abilities, given her natural biases, assumptions, and imperfect recall. So, how can Erika claim that Rikuko is the culprit if Ava's diary shows Rudolph and Kyrie to be the culprits? Aside from claiming that Rikuko has lied about the diary's contents, there is an obvious path to arguing that Ava is the true culprit as Ange desires. The killings actually start with Ava and Hideyoshi accidentally firing their weapons and shooting Natsuhi and Kraus. Since Ava is writing the diary, there is no reason for her to say that she and her husband pulled the triggers intentionally. Of course, this is even stronger evidence that Rikuko is the murderer. This is because there is also no reason for a culprit Ava to say that she accidentally shot someone. Only an innocent Ava attempting to tell the truth would note this detail. The natural conclusion when one sees a highly improbable event, like two guns lethally firing on accident just moments away from each other, is that the incidents were not accidental at all. Consider the possibility that Rikuko had tampered with the guns in advance, inserting small devices that could pull the trigger, release the hammer, or light the gunpowder when signaled remotely. Rikuko then hides in the room and waits for one of the Ushiromiyas to have a gun pointed directly at another. She signals the device and the gun goes off. To the others, it appears that a murder has taken place, while the holder of the gun will be certain that it was an accident. Rudolph and Kyrie do not claim that their guns going off was an accident, but this can again be easily explained. Either one distrusts Ava's diary and claimed that she could see nothing but a culprit's action in Rudolph and Kyrie after their initial discharges, or one claims that this is another illusion crafted by Rikuko. Earlier in the day, Rikuko could have had them receive a letter from the Golden Witch. It could threaten them with death, or perhaps threaten exposing Rudolph's business secrets. To avoid these threats, Rudolph and Kyrie would be asked to play the part of culprits in any situation that made it seem like they were the culprits. And so the essence of what is occurring in the real world of Umineko is a battle between the Furuto sisters over the heart of Ange. Rikuko wants Ange to believe that Scannon is the culprit. Erika wants Ange to believe that Rikuko is the culprit. To avoid Erika revealing this truth, Rikuko threatens to reveal the Kyrie-Rudolph culprit theory to Ange, and claims that this will send her into a depressive spiral, thus guilt-tripping Erika into not accusing Rikuko. Erika has therefore created 2 parables of Kyrie-Rudolph murders to prepare Ange for this threat, and to show her no matter the convincing evidence Rikuko may supply for this theory, that this is the truth is not necessarily so. But why are Rikuko and Erika so concerned with the heart and mind of Ange? If Rikuko is worried about Ange discovering the truth, couldn't she kill her like she killed the rest of the Ushiromiyas? And can't Erika find the evidence to convict Rikuko without Ange's help? The key to this issue does not exist within Umineko itself. However, it does exist within When They Cry. Before there was Bernkastel, there was Furude Rika. Featherine Augustus Aurora created a broken game board, inevitable without the help of a co-plotter like Yasuda or Lambda Delta to help her, and left one of the pieces, Rika, to try and fix it. Rika became the witch Bernkastel in order to escape this game board. There is not just a metaphorical similarity between the characters in Higurashi and Umineko, they are one and the same. The Rika that escaped Featherine's game board is the same one trying to prove that Featherine is the true culprit behind Beatrice's game board. Erika states, "My master was also a witch's piece?" Yes, that kid's master was another bad one. Though she created the game herself, partway through, she lost sight of what her goal was. She ended creating something like a broken game of backgammon, where the start and goal were connected like a donut. What do you mean she lost her goal? I'm talking about a logic error. In her backgammon game, she was unable to draw up a line of logic describing how to reach the goal she desired, so the game remained broken with no goal at all. In that case, she could have quieted down and thought of an answer herself. Instead, she despicably left even the thinking entirely to her piece, Burn. If she wasn't a witch, no. If she hadn't been able to become a witch, she would probably still be a black cat strapped to that typewriter for eternity. That child was blessed by a miracle, succeeded in typing out a miracle, became a witch, and returned from that hell alive. So, look at this face, and know that this is the face that escaped the hell of Higurashi. Know that this is the face that seeks to bring Rikuko to justice. Know that this is the face of a true hero. In Higurashi, Furude Rika finds herself stuck in a time loop in which her friends repeatedly died in gruesome manners at the end. She has become apathetic and would just like for the experience to end. Her friend, Hanyu, who is really the witch that has trapped her here, urges Rika to be less moody and just enjoy the time she has with her friends. In the end, Rika is able to escape the time loop and save her friends, at least from one perspective. In reality, She has traded an infinite life of death and resurrection for a single, shorter, less painful life. This, in essence, is the opposite of the choice made by Battler when he accepts Beatrice and becomes a game master. Battler decides that he prefers the constant resurrection and re-killing of his family to their permanent deaths. In other words, while Battler and Ange seem to be the primary audiences for Featherine and Beatrice's game, the true reader, Miko, is Bernd Castell. With these games, Featherine is essentially saying, "How dare you be so ungrateful? I gift you eternal life and the friends to share it with, and all you think to do is complain? Look at Battler. He understands my blessing. He knows what has been bestowed upon him." The Ange of Rikuko's forgeries represents Featherine's claim that she and Battler are not the same as Bernd Castell, that a continued pursuit of the truth will lead Ange to suicide, and that embracing stories and their power to revive the dead is the way forward for them, even if stories require conflict and pain. Indeed, Bernd Castell is the sick one for not accepting fantasy. Since both the Battler and the Ange that reject the truth are fundamentally a part of Rikuko's forgeries, though, Erika does not accept this. She continues to push on to bring Rikuko to justice and to prove that the quest for truth is proper. This conclusion does make us ask, are witches real? Do the meta-world witches of Rikuko's writings just happen to correspond with the lives of real witches? Did the witches induce Rikuko to write in this manner? These would be some rather counterproductive conclusions to come to, given that the whole point of Umineko is to prove that witches do not exist and that everything has a natural explanation. So, can there be a fully naturalistic explanation which gets us to the same conclusion? The naturalist explanation for a witch is that this is another word for an author. Featherine and Bernd Castell are authorial second identities taken on by Rikuko and Erika. Consider this possibility. Rikuko is the author, or witch, of Higurashi. She included versions of herself and her sister in the story as the characters Hanyu and Rika. At some point, Erika started reading the story, becoming Rikuko's reader Mika. She started giving suggestions and influencing the story. This is why, halfway through, the structure of Higurashi changes. Suddenly, Rika becomes as much or more of a main character than Keiichi. She remembers the events of the previous time loops, and her cheerful personality is revealed to be a front for her more moody one. All of this is a consequence of Rika changing from a piece of Rikuko's to being a piece of Erika's, working within Rikuko's game. Eventually, Rikuko realizes that she didn't really know where she was going with the story and abandons it. To stop it from being left unfinished, Erika takes over as the author, becoming the witch Bernd Castell, and guides her piece Rika to safety. While this explains what Higurashi is and where Bernd Castell came from, it does not explain the significance of Ange to Rikuko and Erika in the same way that it does if Featherine and Bernd Castell are actual witches. However, we can create a similar motivation for them with a few assumptions. Consider the possibility that characters in Higurashi besides Hanyu and Rika also represent real-life people, like, perhaps, Erika's friends. This would explain the importance of Satoko to Higurashi. She is Rika's closest friend, and the impossibility of saving her from abuse is closely tied in Rika's mind to the impossibility of escaping the time loop. I propose this scenario. Erika had a friend similar to the character of Satoko from Higurashi. Like Satoko, this friend had an abusive home life. Erika, at various times, felt melancholic about her inability to save her friend, and wondered if even death would be preferable to this situation. Perhaps the friend had even whispered that she sometimes wondered if she'd prefer it. Rikuko decided to take matters into her own hands and kill the friend. Surprisingly, this did not seem to comfort Erika, even when Rikuko reminded her of the virtues of death over abuse. Deciding to take another approach, Rikuko resurrected this friend as Satoko in her story, Higurashi, but again, her efforts went unappreciated. The mystery was sickening. a parody of the murder that had really taken place. The slice-of-life elements were unbearable, a distraction from the truth of the real Satoka's life. And bringing in the real horrors of the world to the story, making Satoka relive that abuse, well, that was just too much. Rikuko realized that there was nothing she could do to please her fickle sister. With no plan to resolve the story, and no way to use it to cheer Erika up, she abandoned it. Erika couldn't leave the story unfinished, couldn't leave her friend forever stuck in this hell. So she wrote an ending herself. Earlier, I claimed that logic errors need not actually be solved with proper motivations. Indeed, they need not actually be solved with proper logic at all. While authors would like their works to be consistent and logical, they have the power to ignore such rules, and with Higurashi, Burn Castell did. The essential reason that Erika simply had magic grant Keiichi memory of the previous games and allow Hanyu and Akasuka help them is that her true motive was not to craft the perfect story, but to let Satoka rest in peace. She betrayed her good storytelling principles and her commitment to truth in order to escape the hell that Rikuko had trapped her and Satoko in faster. And thus, when they cry is explained. Furuto Rikuko is a witch who can kill and resurrect people an endless number of times with her stories. Her sister, Furuto Erika, was the first victim of this ability when she and her friend were trapped in the tale of Higurashi. When Rikuko abandoned this story, Erika had to become a witch herself to save herself and her friend from the endless cycle of death that Rikuko's story created. Neither of the Furuto sisters have had much luck with love, and Rikuko took this quite poorly, leading her to massacre the Ushiramiyas and make them her next playthings in a new story. Though she cannot yet prove it, Erika suspects her sister, and a battle ensues between them. And a surviving member of the Ushiramiyas became a piece in this battle. Erika believes that the truth shall comfort her by finally putting her family to rest. Rikuko believes that Erika's psychology is not universal, and that Ange will actually be happier with a family forever kept alive in the imaginations of people wondering just what happened on Rokkenjima in 1986. With Rikuko gaining access to Ava's diary, she seems to have won. Erika cannot gain access to any more evidence pointing to Rikuko, and the cat box ensures that witches and goats will constantly keep Ange's family alive. But still, there is always a chance. Erika can always continue to look for the truth. She can always push forward and continue searching. What can Rikuko do about this? She can accomplish her most audacious feat of witchcraft, a resurrection outside the pages of a story. Under the Scanintrus theory, Batoya is a convenience. Ryukishi wants to somehow reunite Ange and Battler without violating the red that he has dyed, and while explaining why he has collaborated with Ikuko on writing the forgeries, but didn't want to see Ange. His solution is to have Battler die by temporarily losing his memories, then regain them and write the story of Battler 8 times over, while at the same time resenting those memories and avoiding Ange to keep Battler from overtaking his new identity. From the Rikugat perspective though, the contrivance of Battler's survival is only natural. Rikuko has hired someone to play the part of Battler, becoming the author of his resurrections. The narrative problems she faces are the same ones that Ryukishi faces in writing a Scanintrus ending with Battler alive, and she solves them in the same way. This solution solves even more problems for Rikuko than it does for Ryukishi. She can't realistically hire a man to be Battler forever, so by instead hiring a man who can play Toya with a Battler trapped inside him, she can create a Battler that Ange can see a few times before Toya again makes himself a stranger. Furthermore, her resurrection also has the features of the resurrections in her novels. Battler is caught in an endless loop, reviving over and over, only to be pushed back down by Toya in a process that he describes as painful. Ange has seen the endless cycle of death and rebirth described in Higurashi and Umineko brought to life in the real world. And she has accepted it. She is happy and grateful. This was the Fukuing House, a welfare institution for unfortunate children who had lost their parents. Ange used her own money to massively remodel it into a beautiful establishment. It's a pleasure to see you again, Miss Kotobuki. Thank you for your invitation. This is from the two of us. It's not much, but I hope the children enjoy it. Thank you very much. We have a form for donations, so if it isn't too much trouble. Rikuko has not only brought Ange's brother back from the dead, proving that Ange accepts the cycle of death and rebirth shown in Higurashi and Umineko, but she has also become a donor in Ange's charity. So she now asks Erika, do you still want to reveal the truth? Do you want to crush the dreams of Ange and the needy children she supports? Are you that much of an intellectual rapist? Given that the story ends here, we can only assume the answer is no.